K. Having already discussed in Chapter 5 how echoes serve as an effective means to evaluate physical, emotional, and thematic distances present in the Navidson record, it is now necessary to remark upon their descriptive limitations. In essence, echoes are confined to large spaces. However, in order to consider how distances within the Navidson house are radically distorted, we must address the more complex ideation of convolution, interference, confusion, and even decentric ideas of design and construction, in other words, the concept of a labyrinth. It would be fantastic if, based on footage from the Navidson record, someone were able to reconstruct a bow plan for the house. Of course, this is an impossibility, not only due to the wall shifts, but also the film's constant destruction of continuity, frequent jump cuts prohibiting any sort of accurate map-making. Consequently, in lieu of a schematic, the film offers instead a schismatic rendering of empty rooms, long hallways, and dead ends, perpetually promising but forever eluding the finality of an immutable layout. Curiously enough, if we can look to history to provide us with some context, the reasons for building labyrinths have varied substantially over the ages. For example, the English hedgerow maze at Longleat was designed to amuse garden party attendants, while Amenemhet III of the 12th dynasty in Egypt built for his mortuary temple a labyrinth near Lake Moeris to protect his soul. Struck through text. Most famous of all, however, was the labyrinth Daedalus constructed for King Minos. It served as a prison. Purportedly located on the island of Crete, in the city of Knossos, the maze was built to incarcerate the Minotaur, a creature born from an illicit encounter between the queen and a bull. As most schoolchildren learn, this monster devoured more than a dozen Athenian youths every few years before Theseus eventually slew it. End of Struck Through Text. However, even as Holloway Roberts, Jed Leader, and Wax Hook make their way further down the stairway in exploration number 4, the purpose of that vast place still continues to elude them. Is it merely an aberration of physics, some kind of warp in space, or just a topiary labyrinth on a much grander scale? Perhaps it serves a funereal purpose, conceals a secret, protects something, imprisons or hides some kind of monster, or, for that matter, imprisons or hides an innocent. As the Holloway team soon discovers, answers to these questions are not exactly forthcoming. Penelope Reed Doob avoids the tangled discussion of purpose by cleverly drawing a distinction between those who walk within a labyrinth and those who stand outside of it. Maze treaders, whose vision ahead and behind is severely constricted and fragmented, suffer confusion, whereas maze viewers, who see the pattern whole from above or in a diagram, are dazzled by its complex artistry. What you see depends on where you stand, and thus, at one and the same time, labyrinths are single, there is one physical structure, and double. They simultaneously incorporate order and disorder, clarity and confusion, unity and multiplicity, artistry and chaos. They may be perceived as a path, a linear but circuitous passage to a goal, or as a pattern, a complete symmetrical design. Our perception of labyrinths is thus intrinsically unstable. Change your perspective, and the labyrinth seems to change. Unfortunately, the dichotomy between those who participate inside and those who view from the outside breaks down when considering the house, simply because no one ever sees that labyrinth in its entirety. Therefore, comprehension of its intricacies must always be derived from within. This not only applies to the house, but to the film itself. From the outset of the Navidson record, we are involved in a labyrinth, meandering from one celluloid cell to the next, trying to peek around the next edit in hopes of finding a solution, a center, a sense of whole, only to discover another sequence, leading in a completely different direction, a continually devolving discourse promising the possibility of discovery, while, all along, dissolving into chaotic ambiguities too blurry to ever completely comprehend. In order to fully appreciate the way the ambages unwind, twist only to rewind and then open up again, whether in Navidson's house or the film. Quae itinerum ambages occurrusque ac recursus inexplicabilis. We should look to the etymological inheritance of a word like labyrinth. The Latin labor is akin to the root labi, meaning to slip or slide backwards, though the commonly perceived meaning suggests difficulty and work. Implicit in labyrinth is a required effort to keep from slipping or falling, in other words, stopping. We cannot relax within those walls, we have to struggle past them. Hugh of St. Victor has gone so far as to suggest that the antithesis of labyrinth, that which contains work, is Noah's Ark. In other words, that which contains rest. If the work demanded by any labyrinth means penetrating or escaping it, the question of process becomes extremely relevant. For instance, one way out of any maze is to simply keep one hand on a wall and walk in one direction. Eventually, the exit will be found. Unfortunately, where the house is concerned, this approach would probably require an infinite amount of time and resources. It cannot be forgotten that the problem posed by exhaustion, a result of labor, is an inextricable part of any encounter with a sophisticated maze. In order to escape, then, we have to remember we cannot ponder all paths, but must decode only those necessary to get out. We must be quick and anything but exhaustive. Yet, as Seneca warned in his Epistulae Moralis 44, going too fast also incurs certain risks. Quod evenit in labyrintho properantibus, ipsa illos velocitas implicat. Unfortunately, the anfractuosity of some labyrinths may actually prohibit a permanent solution. More confounding still, its complexity may exceed the imagination of even the designer. Oddly enough, however, the farther Holloway goes, the more infrequently he stops to take samples or mark their path. Obviously deaf to Seneca's words. Jed is the first to voice some concern over how quickly their team leader is moving. You know where you're going, Holloway? But Holloway just scowls and keeps pushing forward in what appears to be a determined effort to find something different, something defining, or at least some kind of indication of an outsideness to that place. At one point, Holloway even succeeds in scratching, stabbing, and ultimately kicking a hole in a wall, only to discover another windowless room with a doorway leading to another hallway, spawning yet another endless series of empty rooms and passageways, all with walls potentially hiding and thus hinting at a possible exterior, though invariably winding up as just another border to another interior. As Gerard Eisneck famously described it, insides and inness, never inside out. This desire for exteriority is no doubt further amplified by the utter blankness found within. Nothing there provides a reason to linger, in part because not one object, let alone fixture or other manner of finish work, has ever been discovered there. Back in 1771, Sir Joshua Reynolds, in his Discourses on Art, argued against the importance of the particular, calling into question, for example, minute attention to the discriminations of drapery. The clothing is neither woolen, nor linen, nor silk, satin, nor velvet. It is drapery, it is nothing more. Such global appraisal seems perfectly suited for Navidson's house, which, despite its corridors and rooms of various sizes, is nothing more than corridors and rooms, even if sometimes, as John Updike once observed in the course of translating the labyrinth, the galleries seem straight, but curve furtively. Of course, rooms, corridors, and the occasional spiral staircase are themselves subject to patterns of arrangement, in some cases particular patterns. However, considering the constant shifts, the seemingly endless redefinition of route, even the absurd way the first hallway leads away from the living room only to return through a series of lefts back to where the living room should be, but clearly is not. describes a layout in no way reminiscent of any modern floor plans, let alone historical experiments in design. Sebastiano Pérouse de Monclos, however, has written a sizable examination on the changes within the house, positing that they in fact follow Andrea Palladio's structural derivations. By way of a quick summary, Palladian grammar seeks to organize space through a series of strict rules. As Palladio proved, it was possible to use his system to generate a number of layouts, such as Villa Badoer, Villa Imo, Villa Ragona, Villa Poiana, and of course Villa Zeno. In essence, there are only 8 steps. 1. Grid definition. 2. Exterior wall definition. 3. Room layout. 4. Interior wall realignment. 5. Principal entrances, porticos, and exterior wall inflections. 6. Exterior ornamentation, columns. 7. Windows and doors. 8. Termination. Pérouse de Monclos relies on these steps to delineate how Navidson's house was 1. First established, 2. Limited, 3. Subdivided, and 4. So on. He attempts to convince the reader that the constant refiguration of doorways and walls represents a kind of geological loop in the process of working out all possible forms, most likely ad infinitum, but never settling because, as he states in his conclusion, unoccupied space will never cease to change simply because nothing forbids it to do so. The continuous internal alterations only prove that such a house is necessarily uninhabited. Thus, as well as prompting formal inquiries into the ever-elusive internal shape of the house and the rules governing those shifts, Sebastiano Pérouse de Monclos also broaches a much more commonly discussed matter, the question of occupation. Though few will ever agree on the meaning of the configurations or the absence of style in that place, no one has yet to disagree that the labyrinth is still a house. Therefore, the question soon arises whether or not it is someone's house. Though if so, whose? Whose was it, or even whose is it? Thus giving voice to another suspicion. Could the owner still be there? Questions which echo the snippet of gospel Navidson alludes to in his letter to Karen. St. John, chapter 14, where Jesus says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." Something to be taken literally, as well as ironically. It is not surprising, then, that when Holloway's team finally begins the long trek back, they discover the staircase is much farther away than they had anticipated, as if in their absence the distances had stretched. They are forced to camp for a 4th night, thus necessitating strict rationing of food, water, and light, i.e. batteries. On the morning of the 5th day, they reach the stairs and begin the long climb up. Aside from the fact that the diameter of the spiral staircase is now more than 750 feet wide, the ascent moves fairly quickly. During the walk down, Holloway had prudently decided to leave provisions along the way, thus lightening their load and at the same time allocating needed supplies for their return. Though Holloway had initially estimated they would need no more than 8 hours to reach the first of these caches, it ends up taking them nearly 12 hours. At last, at their destination, they quickly set up camp and collapse in their tents. Oddly enough, despite their exhaustion, all of them find it very difficult to fall asleep. On the 6th day, they still make an early start. The knowledge that they are heading back keeps Wax and Jed's spirits elevated. Holloway, however, remains uncharacteristically sallow, revealing what critic Melissa Tao-Janis calls a sign of his deepening atrabilious obsession with the unpresent. Nevertheless, the climb still proceeds smoothly until Holloway discovers the remains of one of their foot-long Leon markers, barely clinging to the wall. It has been badly mauled, half of the fabric torn away by some unimaginable claw. Even worse, their next cache has been gutted. Only traces of the plastic water jug remain, along with a few scattered pieces of power bars. Fuel for the campfire stove has completely disappeared. That's nice, Wax murmurs. Holy shit, Jed hisses. Emily O'Shaughnessy points out in the Chicago Entropy Journal the importance of this discovery. Here at last are the first signs, evidenced ironically enough by the expurgation of a neon sign and the team's provisions, of the house's powerful ability to exorcise any and all things from its midst. Holloway Roberts is not nearly as analytical. He responds as a hunter, and the image that fills the frame is a weapon. Kneeling beside his pack, we watch as he pulls out his Weatherby 300 Magnum and carefully inspects both the bolt and the scope mounts before loading 5 180-grain Nosler partition, registered trademark, rounds in the magazine. As he chambers a 6th round, a glimmer of joy flickers across Holloway's features, as if finally something about that place has begun to make sense. Fueled by the discovery, Holloway insists on exploring at least some of the immediate hallways branching off the staircase. Soon enough, he is stalking doorways, leading the dancing moon of Jed's flashlight with the barrel of his rifle, and always listening. Corners, however, only reveal more corners, and Jed's light only targets ashen walls, though soon enough they all begin to detect that inimitable growl. Note 155. In describing the Egyptian labyrinth, Pliny noted how, when the doors open, there is a terrifying rumble of thunder within. Like carving glaciers, far off in the distance, which at least in the mind's eye inhabits a thin line where rooms and passageways must finally concede to become a horizon. The growl almost always comes like the rustle of a high mountain wind on the trees, Navidson explained later. You hear it first in the distance, a gentle rumble, slowly growing louder as it descends, until finally it's all around you, sweeping over you, and then past you, until it's gone, a mile away, 2 miles away, impossible to follow. Esther Newhost, in her essay, Music as Place in the Navidson Record, provides an interesting interpretation of this sound. Goethe once remarked in a letter to Johann Peter Ekman, March 23, 1829, I call architecture frozen music. The unfreezing of form in the Navidson house releases that music. Unfortunately, since it contains all the harmonies of time and change, only the immortal may savor it. Mortals cannot help but fear those murmuring walls. After all, do they not still sing the song of our end? For Holloway, it is impossible to merely accept the growl as a quality of that place anymore. Upon seeing the torn marker and their lost water, he seems to transfigure the eerie sound into an utterance made by some definitive creature, thus providing him with something concrete to pursue. Holloway almost seems drunk as he rushes after the sound, failing to lay down any fishing line or hang neon markers, rarely even stopping to rest. Jed and Wax do not draw the same conclusion as Holloway. They realize, and quite accurately too, that even though they are traveling farther and farther away from the staircase, they are not getting any closer to the source of the growl. They insist on turning around. Holloway first promises to investigate just a little while longer, then resorts to goading, calling them anything from fucking pussies and cowards to jackholes and cum-guzzling shit-eating cunts. Suffice it to say, this last comment does not steel Wax and Jed's resolve to hunt the great beast. They both stop. Enough is enough. They are tired and more than a little concerned. Their bodies ache from constant cold. Their nerves have been eviscerated by the constant darkness. They are low on battery power, i.e. light, neon markers, and fishing line. Furthermore, the destroyed cache of supplies could indicate their other caches are in jeopardy. If that proves to be the case, they will not have enough water to even make it back within radio range of Navidson. "We're heading home now," Jed snaps. "Fuck you," Holloway barks. "I give the orders here, and I say no one's going anywhere yet." Which, considering the circumstances, are pretty bizarre words to be hearing in such regions of dark. "Look, dude," Wax tries, doing his best to lure Holloway over to their side of sense. "Let's just check in so we can resupply and, get more guns." "I will not abort this mission," Holloway responds sharply, jabbing an angry finger at the 26-year-old from Aspen, Colorado. Easily as much attention has been given to Holloway's use of the word abort as to Navidson's use of the word outpost. The implication in abort is the failure to attain a goal, the prey not killed, the peak not climbed, as if there could have been a final objective in that place. Initially, Holloway's only goal was to reach the bottom of the staircase, which he achieved. Whether it was the growl, or the expurgating qualities of the house, or something entirely else, Holloway decided to redefine that goal midway. Jed and Wax, however, understand that to begin hunting some elusive presence now is just the same as suicide. Without another word, they both turn around and start heading back to the stairs. Holloway refuses to follow them. For a while he rants and raves, screaming profanities at a blue streak, until finally and abruptly he just storms off by himself, vanishing into the blackness. It is another peculiar event which is over almost before it starts. A sudden enfilade of fuck yous and shitheads, followed by silence. Back on the staircase, Jed and Wax wait for Holloway to cool off and return. When several hours pass and there is still no sign of him, they make a brief foray into the area, calling out his name, doing everything in their power to locate him and bring him back. Not only do they not find him, they do not come across a single neon marker or even a shred of fishing line. Holloway has run off blind. We watch as Jed and Wax make camp and try to force themselves to sleep for a few hours. Perhaps they hope time will magically reunite the team. But the morning of the 7th day only brings more of the same. No sign of Holloway, a terrifying shortage of supplies, and a very ugly decision to make. Hank LeBlarnard has devoted several pages on the guilt both men suffered when they decided to head back without Holloway. Nupert Junis de Cascriddle also analyzes the tragic nature of their action, pointing out that in the end, Holloway chose his course. Jed and Wax waited for him, and even made a noble effort to find him. At 5:02 a.m., as the High Eight testifies, their only option was to return without him. As Jed and Wax resume their climb back up the spiral staircase, they discover every neon marker they left behind has been torn apart. Furthermore, the higher they get, the more the markers have been devoured. Around this time, Jed also begins to notice how more than a few of his buttons have vanished. Strips of Velcro have fallen off his parka, shoelaces have shredded, forcing him to bind his boots together with duct tape. Amazingly enough, even his pack frame has crumbled, the word Jed uses. It's kind of scary, Wax mutters in the middle of a long ramble. Like you stop thinking about something and it vanishes. You forget you have pocket zippers and pow, they're gone. Don't take nothing for granted here. Jed keeps wondering aloud. Where the hell is Holloway? And silence keeps trying to mean an answer. An hour later, Jed and Wax reach another cache, placed out of the way against the wall at the far end of a stair, near the entrance to some unexplored corridor. Nothing remains of the food and fuel, but the jug of water is perfectly intact. Wax is back for a second chug, when the crack of a rifle drops him to the floor, blood immediately gushing from his left armpit. Oh my God, Wax screams. My arm! Oh God, Jed, help me, I'm bleeding! Jed immediately crouches next to Wax's side and applies pressure to the wound. Moments later, Holloway emerges from the dark corridor with his rifle in hand. He seems just as shocked by the sight of these two as he is by the sight of the stairs. How the hell did I get here? He blurts out incoherently. I thought it was that thing. Fuck. It was that thing. I'm sure of it. That awful fucking fuck. Don't stand there. Help him, Jed yells. This seems to snap Holloway out of his trance, at least for a little while. He helps Jed peel off Wax's jacket and treat the wound. Fortunately, they are not unprepared. Jed has a medical supply kit loaded with gauze, ace bandages, disinfectant, ointments, and some painkillers. He forces 2 pills into Wax's mouth, but the ensuing cut shows that only some of Wax's agony has subsided. Jed starts to tell Holloway what they will have to do in order to carry Wax the remainder of the way up. Are you crazy? Holloway suddenly shouts. I can't go back now. I just shot someone. What the hell are you talking about? Jed tries to say as calmly as possible. It was an accident. Holloway sits down. It doesn't matter. I'll go to jail. I'll lose everything. I have to think. Are you kidding me? He'll die if you don't help me carry him. I can't go to prison, Holloway mumbles, more to himself now than to either Wax or Jed. I just can't. Don't be ridiculous, Jed says, starting to raise his voice. You're not going to go to jail, but if you sit there and let Wax die, for that they'll lock you up for life. And I'll make sure they throw away the fucking key. Now get up and help me. Holloway does struggle to his feet, but instead of giving Jed a hand, he just walks away, disappearing once again into that impenetrable curtain of black, leaving Jed to carry and care for Wax by himself. For whatever reason, departure suddenly became Holloway's only choice. Une solution politique honorable. Jed does not get very far with Wax before 2 bullets smash into a nearby wall. Holloway's helmet light reveals that he is standing on the opposite side of the stairway. Jed instantly turns off his flashlight and with Wax on his back scrambles up a few stairs. Then, by rapidly clicking his flashlight on and off, he discovers a narrow hallway branching off the stairway into unseen depths. Unfortunately, another shot instantly answers this fractionary bit of vision, the bang echoing over and over again through the pitch. As we can see, Jed does succeed in dragging Wax into this new corridor, the next high-8 clip capturing him with his flashlight back on, moving through a series of tiny rooms. Occasionally, we hear the faint crack of a rifle shot in the distance, causing Jed to push ahead even faster, darting through as many chambers as possible, until his breath rasps painfully in and out of his lungs, and he is forced to put his friend down, unable for the moment to go any farther. Jed just slides to the floor, turns off his light, and starts to sob. At 3:31 a.m., the camera blips on again. Jed has moved Wax to another room. Realizing the camcorder may be his only chance to provide an explanation for what happened, Jed now speaks directly into it, reiterating the events leading up to Holloway's break with reality, and how exhausted, pursued, and ultimately lost, Jed has still somehow managed to carry, drag, and push Wax to a relatively safe place. Unfortunately, he no longer has any idea where they are. So much for my sense of direction. I've spent the last hour looking for a way back to the staircase. No luck. The radio is useless. If help doesn't come soon, he'll die. I'll die. Barely caught in the frame, we can just make out Jed's fist rapping incessantly against the floor, which, as it turns out, has the exact same timbre of those knocks heard back in the living room. Alan P. Winnett, however, remarks on one notable difference. Curiously enough, Despite the similarity of intonation and pitch, the pattern does not even remotely resemble the 3 short, 3 long, 3 short SOS signal heard by the Navidsons. Carlos Avital has suggested the house itself not only carried the signal an incredible distance, but interpreted it as well. Marla Hulbert disagrees, positing that the rhythm of the knocking hardly matters. By the 8th day, the absence of any word from Holloway's team was already a distress signal in and of itself. Regardless of its meaning and the reasons behind its transfiguration, Jed only produces this strange tattoo for a short time before returning to the needs of his badly wounded friend. Wax, for his part, tries to be brave, forcing a smile for the camera, even if it is impossible to miss how pale he looks or misunderstand the meaning of his request. Jed, man, I'm so thirsty, especially since a few seconds earlier he had swallowed a big gulp of water. No stranger to shock, Jed immediately raises Wax's legs to increase blood flow to the head, uses pocket heaters and a solar blanket to keep him warm, and never stops reassuring him, smiling, telling jokes, promising 100 happy endings, a difficult task under any circumstances. Nearly impossible when those guttural cries soon find them, the walls too thin to hold any of it back, sounds too obscene to be shut out. Holloway screaming like some rabid animal, no longer a man, but a creature stirred by fear, pain, and rage. At least he's far off, Jed whispers, in an effort to console Wax. But the sound of distance brings little comfort to either one. Perhaps here is as good a place as any to consider some of the ghosts haunting the Navidson record. And since more than a handful of people have pointed out similarities between Navidson's film and various commercial productions, it seems worthwhile to at least briefly examine what distinguishes documentaries from Hollywood releases. For one thing, Hollywood films rely on sets, actors, expensive film stock, and lush effects to recreate a story. Production value, coupled with the cultural saturation of trade gossip, help ensure a modicum of disbelief, thus reaffirming for the audience that no matter how moving, riveting, or terrifying a film may be, it is still only entertainment. Documentaries, however, rely on interviews, inferior equipment, and virtually no effects to document real events. Audiences are not allowed the safety net of disbelief, and so must turn to more challenging mechanisms of interpretation, which, as is sometimes the case, may lead to denial and aversion. While in the past, live footage was limited to the aftermath, the oral histories given by survivors or photographs taken by pedestrians, these days the proliferation of affordable video cameras and tapes has created more of an opportunity for someone to record a plane wreck or bank robbery as it is actually taking place. Of course, no documentary is ever entirely absolved from at least the suspicion that the mise-en-scène may have been carefully designed, action staged, or lines written and rehearsed, much of which these days is openly carried out under the appellation of reenactment. By now it is common knowledge that Flaherty recreated certain scenes in Nanook for the camera. Similar accusations have been made against shows like America's Funniest Home Videos. For the most part, professionals in the field do their best to police, or at least critique, the latest films, well aware that to lose the public's trust would mean the death rattle for an already besieged art form. Currently, the greatest threat comes from the area of digital manipulation. Sideways text. In 1990, in the New York Times, Andy Grunberg wrote, regular text. In the future, readers of newspapers and magazines will probably view news pictures more as illustrations than as reportage, since they will be well aware that they can no longer distinguish between a genuine image and one that has been manipulated. Even if news photographers and editors resist the temptations of electronic manipulation, as they are likely to do, the credibility of all reproduced images will be diminished by a climate of reduced expectations. In short, photographs will not seem as real as they once did. Also in 1990, Associated Press executive Vincent Alabiso acknowledged the power of digital technology and condemned its use to falsify images. The electronic darkroom is a highly sophisticated photo editing tool. It takes us out of a chemical darkroom where subtle printing techniques such as burning and dodging have long been accepted as journalistically sound. Today, these terms are replaced by image manipulation and enhancement. In a time when such broad terms could be misconstrued, we need to set limits and restate some basic tenets. The content of photographs will never be changed or manipulated in any way. A year later, the NPPA, National Press Photographers Association, also recognized the power of electronic imaging techniques. As journalists, we believe the guiding principle of our profession is accuracy. Therefore, we believe it is wrong to alter the content of a photograph in a way that deceives the public. As photojournalists, we have the responsibility to document society and to preserve its images as a matter of historical record. It is clear that the emerging electronic technologies provide new challenges to the integrity of photographic images. The technology enables the manipulation of the content of an image in such a way that the change is virtually undetectable. In light of this, we, the National Press Photographers Associations, reaffirm the basis of our ethics. Accurate representation is the benchmark of our profession. Then, in 1992, MIT professor William J. Mitchell offered this powerful summation. Protagonists of the institutions of journalism, with their interest in being trusted, of the legal system, with their need for provably reliable evidence, and of science, with their foundational faith in the recording instrument, may well fight hard to maintain the hegemony of the standard photographic image. But others will see the emergence of digital imaging as a welcome opportunity to expose the aporias in photography's construction of the visual world, to deconstruct the very ideas of photographic objectivity and closure, and to resist what has become an increasingly sclerotic pictorial tradition. Ironically, the very technology that instructs us to mistrust the image also creates the means by which to accredit it. As author Murphy Gruner once remarked, just as it is true with Chandler's Marlowe, the viewer is won over simply because the shirts are rumpled, the soles are worn, and there's that ever-present hat. These days, nothing deserves our faith less than the slick and expensive, which is how video and film technology comes to us, rumpled or slick. Rumpled technology, capital M for Marlowe, hails from Good Guys, Radio Shack, or Fry's Electronics. It is cheap, available, and very dangerous. One needs only to consider the George Holliday Rodney King video to recognize the power of such low-end technology. Furthermore, as the recording time for tapes and digital discs increases, as battery life is extended, and as camera size is reduced, the larger the window will grow for capturing events as they occur. Slick technology, capital S for slick, is the opposite, expensive, cumbersome, and time-consuming. But it too is also very powerful. Digital manipulation allows for the creation of almost anything the imagination can come up with, all in the safe confines of an editing suite, equipped with 24-hour catering and an on-site masseuse. As Grunberg, Alabiso, and Mitchell contend, this impressive ability to manipulate images must someday permanently deracinate film and video from its now sacrosanct position as eyewitness. The perversion of image will make the Rodney King video inadmissible in a court of law. Paragraph break. Incredible as it may seem, Los Angeles Mayor Bradley's statement, "Our eyes did not deceive us. We saw what we saw, and what we saw was a crime," will seem ludicrous. Truth will once again revert to the shady territories of the word and humanity's abilities to judge its peculiar modalities. Nor is this a particularly original prediction. Anything from Michael Crichton's Rising Sun to Delgado's Card Tricks or Lisa Mayne, Slit, Beta's Confession of a Porn Star delve into the increasingly protean nature of a digital universe. Paragraph break. In his article, True Grit, Anthony Lane at The New Yorker claims, "Grittiness is the most difficult element to construct and will always elude the finest studio magician. Grit, however, does not elude Navidson." Paragraph break. Consider the savage scene captured on grainy 16mm film of a tourist eaten alive by lions in a wildlife preserve in Angola, traces of death, and compare it to the ridiculous and costly comedy Eraser, in which several villains are dismembered by alligators. William J. Mitchell offers an alternate description of grit when he highlights Barth's observation that reality incorporates seemingly functionless detail because it is there, to signal that this is indeed an unfiltered sample of the real. Kenneth Turan, however, disagrees with Lane's conclusion. Navidson has still relied on FX. Don't fool yourself into thinking any of this stuff's true. Grit's just grit, and the room stretching is all care of industrial light and magic. Ella Taylor, Charles Champlin, Todd McCarthy, Annette Insdorf, G.O. Pilfer, and Janet Maslin all sidestep the issue with a sentence or two. However, even serious aficionados of documentaries or live footage, despite expressing wonder over the numerous details suggesting the veracity of the Navidson record, cannot get past the absolute physical absurdity of the house. As Sonny Beauregard quipped, "Were it not for the fact that this is a supreme Gothic tale, we'd have bought the whole thing hook, line, and sinker." Perhaps the best argument for the authenticity of the Navidson record does not come from film critics, university scholars, or festival panel members, but rather from the IRS. Even a cursory glance at Will Navidson's tax statements, or for that matter Karen's, Tom's, or Billy Reston's, proves the impossibility of digital manipulation. They just never had enough money. Sonny Beauregard conservatively estimates the special effects in the Navidson record would cost a minimum of $6.5 million, taking into account the total received for the Guggenheim Fellowship, the NEA grant, everyone's credit limit on Visa, MasterCard, Amex, etc., not to mention savings and equity. Navidson comes up $5.5 million short. Beauregard again. Considering the cost of special effects these days, it is inconceivable how Navidson could have created his house. Strangely, then, the best argument for fact is the absolute unaffordability of fiction. Thus, it would appear, the ghost haunting the Navidson record, continually bashing against the door, is none other than the recurring threat of its own reality. Eventually, Jed tries again to carry Wax toward what he hopes is home. He also attempts periodically to signal Navidson on the radio, though he never gets a response. Regrettably, very little footage exists from this part of the voyage. Battery levels are running low, and there is not much desire on Jed's part to exert any energy towards memorializing what seems more and more like a trek toward his own end. The penultimate clip finds Jed huddled next to Wax in a very small room. Wax is silent, Jed completely exhausted. It is remarkable how, faced with his own death, Jed still refuses to leave his friend. He tells the camera he will go no further, even though the growl seems to be closing in around them. In the final shot, Jed focuses the camera on the door. Something is on the other side, hammering against it, over and over again. Whatever comes for those who are never seen again has come from... Note, typo, should read, for. Endnote. Him. And Jed can do nothing but focus the camera on the hinges as the door slowly begins to give way.